Hi, everyone, and thanks for tuning in today for another episode of Pursue the Hunt Live. Your host, Mike Friesen, and I'm joined here again with Ryan, and we've got Travis and Kamloops here. And as you can see, we've got a few props here today. So we are going to be covering optics, binos, rangefinders, rifle scopes, spotting scopes. We're just going to talk about different uses, applications, magnifications, and hopefully answer maybe some questions you have around optics today. So thanks, Travis, for joining in here again today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
All right, awesome. So we'll start with talking about binoculars. Travis, why don't you talk about a little bit like best use practices for binoculars, what they're really applicable for?
They're really applicable for spotting game. Yeah, I guess in choosing binoculars, you have two things to go by: your magnification and your size of your objective lens. I have 10 by 50s, and some of the reasoning I went with that. First of all, I started out just with binos and not a spotting scope, so I wanted something with a little bit more magnification because I was doing more open glassing stuff. And so, yeah, it really boils down to kind of what type of hunting you're really trying to do. If you're more, in thicker bush, and all you need is something small just to pick something out, see little things here and there, then going with something with a smaller magnification allows you to have a greater field of view. And now upping that, like I did with the 10s, it shrinks your field of view, but helps you to see farther away. So a little bit of what I did, what you can do to mitigate that is to go with a bigger objective lens. So that's why I went with the 10 by 50s, just so it still would allow me to have the magnification and the field of view, so I could see further away and see more, be able to identify things a little bit better. So these are good for more long range stuff, not quite as good close quarters, because then you're really shrinking things down, and it's hard to see the big picture and spot game out of a field when your vision is quite narrowed. So yeah, that's kind of the reasoning behind these guys. I guess, yeah. Are we going to go into accessories now, or maybe a little later?
Yeah, I know. In a previous episode, you mentioned about your tripod stand with your bino clip and stuff. Why don't you show us what you got there as well?
Okay. Well, as you guys will probably tell, I like Vortex stuff. They have a pretty good bino adapter. If you can see, it clips on to the bottom there of the binos, and then I have an adapter here that's quite small, and that just is 1/4-inch threads onto a quick release plate, and you put that onto any tripod. So it's super fast, right? It just sits in here, and then it's steady, right? And so that goes really well, right? I have a smaller, more compact tripod that Vortex makes called the High Country. It's super light, but it's not as rated for as heavy things. So, right, not as great for the spotting scope that I have here. But I also have the bigger Vortex GT, the Pro GT model. So it's a lot heftier and can handle a lot heavier things. But just in saying that, you need to kind of choose a tripod that is suited for what you want to do, and the weight that you're planning to put on it. Because part of the success that comes in using a bino adapter with a tripod is the steadiness. The point is to get it completely still, no shaking, no waving, right? When I use it, I barely touch my face to it, right? You have it on there, and you just kind of barely rest your eyes on it, so you're not moving it. And doing so, right, that's where I say you're able to spot things way easier. It's like taking your eyes, right, and completely magnifying it without any other distortion factor as far as movement is concerned. So,
awesome. Yeah. No, that's great. And I mean, I I've got the Vortex 8x42s, so a little bit smaller objective lens. I like a little bit more compact. They're really great. I mean, I've had these for a long period of time, and a lot of the stuff that I hunt is agricultural based, river valleys and things like that, where, you know, a spotting scope would be useful, but not as often. Like the binos for me were a lot more useful early on. But then as I started doing more backcountry mountain hunts where the terrain is way more vast, and I'll get into this when we get into the spotting scope more, but I definitely use these as a wider field of view to identify things. And then I use the spotting scope to kind of go in and investigate. But on that too, I've got a little adapter on mine as well. It's not as fancy as Travis's, but it works well. As far as accessories as well, I noticed Travis has one too. Bino harness. First sheep hunt I ever went on, I did not have a bino harness, and it was horrible. The neck strap basically rubbed the skin raw as I sweat, and then it chafed as it dangled side to side, and it was it was something so uncomfortable and memorable that I vowed as soon as I got back from my sheep trip, I purchased a bino pack. This bino pack is really great too because it's got the rangefinder pouch underneath. So you've got binos on top and then two sides. I actually keep my release for my bow in a pocket so I don't lose that. So it's actually pretty handy. But definitely also as archery goes, practice shooting with your bino pack on. I've noticed, I've talked to some guys where they bought really bulky bino packs and stuff, and it was getting in the way a little bit and things like that. So
Yeah, you usually don't ever go anywhere without your binos. So like this is a great place that I put my licenses and everything in, and you know, depending on what kind of pack you have, you can put like your little mini, you know, kill kit with your knife and gloves and little first aid or whatever you want. I got this little like lens cleaner that sits on there too, right? That's super important. You never want dirty lenses. If it's raining, to wipe it off so you can actually see through it and use it. It's pretty imperative.
yeah, for sure. Ryan, what about you? What do you run for binos?
Um, Binos, I like the 10 by 42. For me, my bino option has varied throughout the years. I've been as high as 12 by 50s, 20 by 50s, but I've settled down on that 10 to 42. It does what I need it to, and mainly my binoculars are for that quick acquisition to see where game is. If I need to get in closer from the distance that I'm at, I'll switch up to a spotting scope. Now, the reason why I use binoculars, and I just want to state that, and a spotting scope, is because your telescopic device or your scope on your firearm is not what we use to identify a target.
Correct.
We've talked about law before a little bit briefly, just to remind hunters that it's their responsibility to know the differences in the areas they're in. Now, as far as I know, anywhere in Canada, you point a firearm at somebody, whether it's loaded or unloaded, you're going to get yourself in a lot of hot water.
Yeah.
Okay, and so using your scope on your firearm does not suffice to identify a target. That's why we use our binoculars.
Okay, well, yeah, Ryan, let's move on to rifle scopes. As we can see here, you've
Now
brought some show and tell.
when we're talking about rifle scopes or any of our optics, you can start out at a low level clarity depending on the company you go with. Sometimes even within a company, they'll have different levels. They'll have your economy level, your mid-range, and then of course your high-end range that you're going to be paying a lot of money for. Now, that being said, with rifle scopes, it can vary widely depending on the terrain you're in. If you're in tight, close quarters, maybe just simple open sights is what you're going to prefer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you do choose to go to a telescopic sight, which we a lot of the times call a scope, if we're going to go to a scope, we're going to use a low magnification in tight quarters, where we're going to deal with terrain or brush and something showing up quicker than we may expect. That being said, if we're going to shoot a little further distance, we're getting out a few hundred yards, even going out, distance shooting. Now, that's something that I generally like to see people work on paper with, and be cautious about shooting long range when hunting. So much can happen between the time you pull your trigger and the bullet arriving on your target. So it takes some knowledge to make those types of shots.
It's a skill for sure.
Definitely. Now, when it comes to telescopic sights, we can have variances anywhere from 1 power magnification, and they run all the way up the gambit. I've seen 20, 30 times magnification. Now that's getting pretty extreme, because to hold something on target that has that magnification, every little movement you make, even your heartbeat starts to show in that magnification. Travis alluded to it earlier, the objective lens that you have on your binoculars or your telescopic sight does make a difference for light, clarity, etc. Now with that, the larger the objective lens, I've found does allow it to bring more light into areas where, say, we're shooting in a canopy of trees, or underneath a canopy of trees, and we don't have great eyesight, or there's a lot of shadows and light being shone through in spots. It gives us better clarity. That being said, you'll see on this particular telescopic sight, I do like to run some sort of cover, because if I'm hiking around, for instance, you guys on your sheep hunt, goat hunts, even your run-of-the-mill, you're going to go out on a Sunday afternoon because that's all the time you've got, and you're going out for a hunt in a field, weather can change quickly. Keeping your lenses clean, clear, and dry does help on your shooting acquisition. Now, scopes we talked about, we don't use them to identify a target. What they do is they improve our shooting accuracy. So if we can keep them clean, it goes a long ways to harvesting a decent, good animal.
So yeah, and I actually was talking to a gentleman. We were talking hunting, and this is where I got it from. Is he was charged by a grizzly bear, and he went to pull his rifle up, and it was on full power.
Yeah.
And all you see is fur, right? And so it was actually a really great point. It got me thinking. It's like, okay, well, unless you're dialed into an animal, keep your scope on low power, right? And that's just kind of a habit that I've gotten into, that my scope is usually on the lowest or one of the lower powers, unless I need to magnify it more. Yeah. And also alluding to what you just said, movement on target, right? If you're backed off your magnification a little bit, those crosshairs don't move as much on your target, and sometimes it's aim small, miss small.
Yeah. And if you're getting out there and shooting your rifle, practicing with your rifle at a range, I recommend seeing what those different magnifications do. They change the point of impact on your target by changing the magnification on most telescopic sights. Now, when you're shooting, and say you're a novice, or even some experienced shooters don't realize that they're having a hard time grouping their target, their point of impact on the target, doing groups of 3, sometimes 2, sometimes 5, whatever that shooter decides to do, and they're having a large grouping. Next time you're doing that, and say you're at 100 yards or 200 yards, you're having a hard time getting a tight group. Before condemning the firearm or before condemning the telescopic sight, sometimes it's us behind the wheel. You got to make sure that you eliminate you as the problem. Turn down your magnification. Some guys are running 10 powers, 12 powers, and have them cranked right up, and they're having a hard time getting that tight grouping. Like I've said, turn it down to 6, and simply that's all you've done, and reshoot a group. And if it tightens up, well, maybe it's not the equipment you're using.
Proof's in the pudding.
Yeah.
And just like archery too, I mean, I'm not a heavy rifle shooter. I love the bow hunting, but anchor points on a firearm, like where your cheek pressure is and things like that, eye relief can definitely.
Yeah. And speaking of eye relief, when it comes to telescopic sights, there's a wide range of telescopic sights out there. You can have some that are situated further down the barrel and have a large, extremely large eye relief. Now, when it comes to a standard scope, you're looking anywhere from, it can be 2.5 inches all the way up to 4 inches eye relief. So that means the distance at which the rear objective lens is to your eye. And sometimes you want to have a little bit more distance, maybe depending on the shooting position you're in, or maybe comfort level with a shooter. If they're in their mind worried about a gun coming back to touch their eyebrow, giving them that old scope eye, them knowing that there's a larger eye relief might give them a little bit more comfort. Does that necessarily going to change the outcome? No, because it depends on how you hold the firearm.
You still gotta put the bullet down range.
Correct.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, great. So what about, did you want to talk anything about reticles? Now, there's a lot of talk about reticles out there.
There are many different reticles, and basically it comes down to your preference. I'm sure even in the group of the three of us, we have a different preference in reticles. I have a different preference in reticle from one caliber to the next, or one firearm to the next. So when it comes down to that, even I argue with myself. Okay, so you're going to find them all the way from a thin duplex to a thick duplex. You're going to find some that just have a dot, some that will have a objective lens that has like a triangle or a square in there. Some of them will even be electronic, so that the reticles can illuminate, so that it just gives you better sight when you're looking into, say, those shadows we talked about in a canopy situation. That being said, they can be anywhere from red, blues, greens. The sky is literally the limit when it comes to telescopic devices on a firearm. So it's going to come down to preference. With that being said, I would prefer people, instead of going out there and spending thousands of dollars on a scope, if they get the chance to do some research, first of all, on the internet, talking to friends, that'll give you a base to start with. After that, you can get into the stores, start seeing some of them. A lot of retail stores will allow you to hold a scope up, as long as it's not attached to a firearm, and be looking down and seeing what it looks like even inside a store. Do it in a larger store, like say a Cabela's or something like that, where you can stretch out through the store and pick things out. Pick out the fine-tuned things. See how clear it is. Some retail stores, even our local one, will, of course, they're going to walk beside you, let you step outside to see what it looks like in daylight. Daylight compared to store lighting is very different. Also, when you're looking for a scope, if you get the chance to mount it on a gun, or a friend has a multitude of different telescopic devices, go to the range with them. You know,
try them out.
Offer to pay for your ammunition. Ammunition isn't cheap nowadays, especially here in our neck of the woods. So when it comes down to it, go to the range, offer to pay for the ammunition. There might be that chance of him or her allowing you to use that firearm and see what the different reticles are like just behind the gun.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're just getting into hunting, you don't think you have to go complicated and, you know, use all the drop bars and things like that. If you're not comfortable, like, just cross it.
Yeah,
and get used to shooting a firearm and comfortable with how it reacts. I mean, for me, I use a simple 3x9, and I was just, luckily, you know, I live out of town, so I have my own nice little berm set up, and I was touching a 8-inch steel plate at 280 yards the other day, and it's only a 3x9, and I'll tell you what, an 8-inch piece of steel at 280 yards at 9 magnification, pretty tiny. But, you know, you get comfortable with the rifle you're shooting and the ammo you're shooting, how your gun reacts to it. You know, there's a lot of commercials. It's like, you know, it's not you, it's the item. It's like, no, you know, the rifle or the bow will only do what you tell it to do. So learn how to shoot and get comfortable with it.
There's some truth to that, definitely. I would, for the novice hunter out there, and this is just a recommendation, stick to simplicity when picking your first scope. You can always go up from there. You're going to find out that your first firearm and your first scope may not be the last one. you purchase in your lifetime. So when you do get out there, start with simplicity, work your way up to your comfort level. Don't shoot anything beyond your comfort level. Accuracy is far more important
Yeah.
than the quality or the dollar figure you're going to put on your firearm.
Or even sometimes, the caliber, but we can get into that in another episode. Okay, Travis, let's talk about spotting scopes. Let's see what you got there.
Well, yeah, I got the Vortex. It's the 15 45 by 65. So that's 65 is the objective lens, and the magnification goes from 15 to 45. I purchased this a couple years ago in anticipation for our sheep mountain goat hunt. Now that's kind of where these things. Sorry, I'm shaking the camera. Where these things really shine and are super important is for that identification. And when we're going on a sheep hunt where you need to be able to properly identify, annular rings on a ram, you need to be able to see, right? And when you're doing that on a mountainside, and there's nothing's usually close when you're in the mountain range, right? So you need something with the power and the magnification, right, to push out and see that, because that's very, very important, especially for sheep hunting, that you properly identify that as a legal ram, whether you're looking for the full curl, 3/4, whatever it may be, depending on the species. They vary, right, in the objective lens. I know Vortex, they make one, it's 20 to 60 by 85, I think, right? So it's a much bigger objective lens magnification. So you're able to see farther away. But I think the biggest determination, not the biggest, but one of the determinations is the weight factor of these things. If you're using this, you gotta haul this around, right? And when you're doing mountain trips, every ounce counts, right? So you need to determine what is most important for you or what you need. If you're, in a place where you're able to maybe get a little bit closer, then having something of this nature is totally fine. But if you know that you're going to be glassing a long ways away, then maybe you need to step it up with something a little bit bigger. Or maybe you just glass cut blocks for whatever, bear, deer, moose, and you can go with something even smaller. I know they come with an even smaller one. It's got a 50 mil objective lens, and I can't remember the magnification, but it's around the same as this one. But that comes at a much lighter weight, right? So it's easier to maneuver, to use, and to handle. And like I said before, just with tripods, you need to have the right tripod for the spotting scope that you're going to use. The bigger spotting scope, the heftier tripod you should have. I used this little one on our goat trip, and it just worked, right? It's probably not the best. It's tippier. It can maybe shake a little more, especially if you get a good wind. But yeah, so there's so many different tripods on the market. There's brands made by hunting specific brands, and then there's tons just optics, like for camera video, right? So the options are endless. The prices are, range drastically. So you kind of have to pick what fits into your budget and what is most important as far as weight and clarity and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, right, the higher end ones have better glass. They let in more light. However it works, I'm not a scientist, but they're able to let more light in, have more clarity over the full picture, field of view. And yeah, they obviously range to so much different brands, from your very entry level ones to your extremely expensive ones. So just you gotta find what works for you and what you're able to get.
Yeah, and you know, you were mentioning about the bigger ones, and we got the Hulk back here, and you know, we've got the bigger objective ones. Do you want to just touch base on the
Sure.
size of
Um,
that?
Objective lens just allows wider field of view, more light into your spotting scope. Now, when it comes down to it, me in my situation, I like using my binoculars all day long. Then once I've found the game that I'm looking for, because a lot of times you can pass over a hillside a multitude of times before you see that game move. When it does move and you've got it in your binoculars, then you can switch up to your spotting scope to see, you know, legality reasons. Or what I like to do is not walk as far as I need to unless I have to. It'll save miles and miles and tons of energy by using a good optic and a spotting scope. Instead of hiking over there to see what the game looks like, I'll use optics. It also disturbs game less, so I'm not pushing them over the next mountain range to maybe another hunter.
Right. So let's talk about a little bit about eyepieces. So you've got a straight eyepiece here. Travis and I both have angled. Was that like a personal preference?
Yeah, this one's not mine. This one was borrowed. So in the past, I've always gone with straight eyepieces just because of the way I prefer laying down on a hillside. I know majority of people like to go to what you have, the angled eyepiece. Me, it's just personal preference.
Okay. Yeah, and then that was mine too. I mean, I really purchased the spotting scope for more of my backcountry hunts. I primarily use my binoculars. Sometimes I wish I've had them on elk hunts where it'd be probably a little nicer to count the points instead of having to close that distance, like you were saying before, like not push the game. But majority of the time, I'm not often packing my spotting scope unless I'm heading to the backcountry. So I just wanted to touch base a little bit on rangefinders. I know we've kind of all got them here now. Particularly for me, when I select a rangefinder, and most of them have it now, but it's the angle compensator. I find for bow hunting, the angle compensator definitely cuts out the guesswork when you're ranging game down or up a hill, as when you sight in, you're based on horizontal distance. So even if the game is 60 yards down the hill, it might only be 30 yards of actual horizontal distance. So having an angle compensator within your rangefinder takes out the guesswork and gives you the actual horizontal distance to the game rather than the true distance, because you actually want to aim and shoot the game based on the horizontal distance.
And that varies too if you're a rifle shooter or you're an archery shooter. Archery shooters, it's much more relevant at those distances. Now, in a rifle setting, 60 yards or 100 yards is 60 yards or 100 yards.
Yeah.
But at further distances with a rifle, yes, it can come into play, but it does react a little different than an arrow.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, yeah, that's just, you know, speed of an arrow, weight of an arrow, all that. You know, the trajectory is much more lofty, so there's more margin of error. And anytime you can make a more ethical shot, that's what you definitely want to do. Cool. Okay. Well.
Yeah, and just a little bit about like rangefinders. I think it's generally speaking, they're usually like this is the Ranger 1000, so they're usually kind of named after how far they're capable of ranging. But a general rule is that when you're ranging an animal, a non-reflective surface, they're usually about half of what they're rated for as to be able to range an animal. So this one, I pretty consistently can range deer and stuff under 500 yards, but above that, you know, it kind of gets dicey. It depends on I guess how shiny the animal is.
Well, and how steady you are, where that laser is actually hitting that far away. I mean, 600 plus yards is a long ways away, right? So
Yeah.
you have to be pretty steady with that. Is there anything else you wanted to add in on?
Oh, I think when it comes down to it, we're just touching base on optics. There is a vast difference in price ranges.
Mm-hmm.
If it comes to a binocular where you're using it to identify a target, to make sure that, first of all, it's lawful to shoot at, it's safe to shoot at, that it's legal to shoot at, etc. Make sure that you guys spend the most you can on your binoculars. After that, you can choose on what you spend on telescopic devices on your firearm, as well as your spotting scopes.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point too when you talk about safety. Don't forget to check what's behind your target. A lot of times I've been in situations where the animal I'm after ends up skylining itself on a ridge, and that's just not a great place to take a shot, because even if you hit that target, that bullet can pass through and steal trajectory for a long ways, and maybe there's a hunting camp on the other side of the ridge or something like that. So it's always good to use optics as part of the equation, but the gray matter between your ears is ultimately what makes that decision. So, just another tool and a resource, but check behind your target, see if it's safe to shoot as well.
I think we've just touched base, like I said,
Yeah.
on optics. You can spend a lot of time researching it. I encourage people to research it before throwing a dollar after a scope. There's many different companies. I use a wide variety of different companies in the past. And so just do your research, talk to friends, get out there and try and, borrow stuff.
Use them.
And go from there.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks guys for joining in here today. And thank you guys for watching. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. And we'll see you later.